Time for the bench, folks. And standing patiently and diplomatically is our main diplomat in New York City. This man is the one who heads Kenya's non-permanent membership at the United Nations. As you know, Kenya aggressively campaigned and got the position. And since January 2021, we've been sitting as a non-permanent member, United Nations Security Council. Ambassador Martin Kimani, our guest tonight. Good to see you, Balozi.
Thank you, Jeff.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
How's New York City? How you doing?
It's warm, it's summer. People are vaccinated much more than most other parts of the world. So they're starting to relax their COVID provisions. So coming back home, it's back to reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Tell me something. For those who don't know, being a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, what does that mean? Explain to us.
Well, it means you're elected. There are 15 members. 5 of them are permanent. They were put there at the beginning of the United Nations in the 1940s. The other 10, including Kenya, are elected by members of the United Nations, and that's why you campaign. And you have 3 seats in Africa, some seats in Asia, some seats in Europe, and South America. And so we're not just non-permanent, but we're elected. And we're elected to go and be part of resolving threats to international peace and security. And so our election there carries what we're there to do as Kenya, but also what is our obligation to our fellow Africans who put us there, and to the global community and all those countries and people who don't have a voice, who want peace. And that's what it means to be there.
So tell me, Balozi, a typical day. Again, it's not just Africa issues, which is what many of us think you're dealing with.
Yeah.
What's a typical day like at the UN Security Council?
Well, a typical day is busy. A typical day is having possibly at least 1 meeting or perhaps 2 that have to do with one country or the other that's in trouble. It's either passing a resolution that obliges that country to act in a certain way, or deploys peacekeepers to that country, or shapes how those peacekeepers will operate in that country. It's also a day of working with a team, a Kenyan team, to prepare for the day. And this team is made up of experts, it's made up of diplomats. So they're reading every piece of information from the Secretary General and his thousands of employees to do with these countries. And then they're taking that and working with other countries to forge a position. And that position is then I bring it up in a debate. And that debate, sometimes you get the better, sometimes the worse. And your goal on the day is to make sure that Kenya's voice and Africa's voice has been heard.
So it could be anything from, let's say, Iraq to Syria to Afghanistan. I mean, we're talking major global issues.
Yeah, and remember, our Kenya mission to the United Nations is not just doing the Security Council. We're doing development issues. We're doing food systems, agriculture, energy. So there's a lot of Wanjiko work in terms of making her food cheaper, more opportunities for her. And there's also the work of creating a more peaceful region. So it's a day of debating, reaching out, a lot of conversations. It's a day of strategizing and plotting, of creating alliances, and often of all the time tightening the bonds with other African countries.
Balozi, I'm curious here. So there's 10 non-permanent members, right? What do they think of people like you? I mean, you know, you're there, they know you're there for a couple of years. You know, you're in and out. You're not here to stay like us 5 permanent members. What is the impression you get?
Yeah. Well, there's a little bit of a hierarchy there. There's a bit of a hierarchy. I mean, the permanent 5 reflect how the world was at the end of the Second World War. Kenya wasn't independent, right? A huge part of the globe was still under colonial rule. And these 5 countries are the ones that had torn each other and the world to pieces. So then they created a system where they had veto power and were going to be permanent. So today, the Security Council has changed a lot. And they've always been 3 African members, or they've been African members through history, but today African members are very united. And so even though you're only there for 2 years, there's increasingly the understanding that Africa has a strong voice, because these guys, 70% of what we do is in Africa, on the peace and security issues in Africa. So they have the permanency. Sometimes they think that they can dictate how things go. Sometimes they don't listen that well. Sometimes they have interests that are not exactly in tune with our interests as Africans. And so it's our job for that short period to make the point, and then to build the institutions that allow a continuity of effort. And that's what we're here to do in Kenya this time. We're here with the other members of the African 3+1, so that even when they leave in December and others join them, we just keep going.
By the way, I'm going to come to Africa 3+1 in a moment, but this is not the first time Kenya has been a non-permanent member of the Security Council, right?
Yeah.
It's not the first time. What do they think of us out there? I mean, you know, on the outside looking in, what do they think of us?
So I've learned a lot. You know, when you watch news here and you read papers, we have a pretty bad story about ourselves. But out there, how do we look? I've learned a lot about how people see Kenya. One, they think Kenya is an independent country. That's no small thing. They think your ambassador, when I speak, no one forces me to say anything that Kenya does not want said. They think Kenya has an ability in building peace. They know what Kenya has done with South Sudan, with Somalia, in this region. And so when they're discussing this region and other conflict situations, they want to hear, what does Kenya think? And more than that, they think Kenya has a responsibility. They think Kenya can be much more powerful than even sometimes we realize. So we're a respected country. We're a country with a bold voice. And that bold voice is just Kenya's voice. Yeah? The world needs to hear us. And why? Because we've learned the hard way how to build peace, how to help our neighbors be peaceful. We've learned over a half century how to build an economy. We may not be the richest, but in this region, we show the possibilities. That's what they think of us.
And they respect that. When we talk about closing camps, let's say in Dadaab and Kakuma, you know, to secure our borders, what do they say? What's the feeling out there?
What we're telling them is, first, we understand our obligations. We are a paid-up, committed member of the United Nations and of the international community. So we have obligations to refugees, to people suffering, and we meet those obligations. But what we've been telling them is there is a change of the character of how this problem is manifesting. Refugee camps are not supposed to last for decades. That's not what the international obligations were built to support. And what's happening increasingly is that the top powerful countries on the Security Council are increasingly not solving political problems. And they're letting countries, neighboring troubled areas, to get the blowback from those countries in the form of refugees, instability. And what we're telling them is, you've got to solve these problems. We have an obligation to refugees to solve their problems. The obligation is not just to house refugees, it's to solve the refugee problem. And that's a problem that is squarely on the doorstep of the Security Council. And that's part of the reason we wanted to join, because what is increasingly happening in the Council is we speak a lot about humanitarian issues, but our mandate is not just the delivery of humanitarian aid to refugees, it's actually to solve the problems that lead to refugees in the first place.
Bilzi, you have a background not just in the corporate world, but also in peace and security. When you look around the region, I mean, we're surrounded by all kinds of enemies. And you can see that. Are we amplifying the voice of peace? Can you see that on the continent? Are we playing our role as Kenya?
I think so. Kenya is not surrounded by its enemies, but Kenya is surrounded by fragile countries that are having a hard time. When you sit in the Security Council in that chamber, and it's a magnificent chamber with beautiful murals, golden doors, it's very fancy. One country after the other is broken. All of them are broken. To get to the Security Council, there's something seriously wrong. And Jeff, they all manifest differently, but it's the same issue all the time. Can you share power? Can you manage diversity? Can you manage the tension between the capital and the provinces? Do people feel they have a voice and that they're included in their government? These issues are the ones breaking countries everywhere. And so when people mishandle them, the countries break. And Kenya has been to the brink before, to the brink. We didn't break, but to the brink. And so we have a unique understanding of, one, our own fragilities, but two, what we've tried to do with them. And I think Kenyans should be very proud. I know we have a lot of things we are fighting about. There are a lot of disagreements we have, but we should be very proud because managing to build a democracy, a free country, I can say anything on this show, hopefully not too much that I get fired, but I'm a free Kenyan and I can speak freely. You can't take that for granted. We're in a fragile region where the freedom to speak your mind is not guaranteed. The freedom to start your business and keep your low property is not guaranteed. The freedom to live in a democracy and choose your leaders is not guaranteed. So I think Kenya really stands to me as the kind of country on the Security Council that adds value, because when we speak, we know what we're saying.
And you mentioned those fragile countries, and that's a very interesting way that you mentioned. You know, we're surrounded by fragile countries. But how fragile are we as Kenyans? You know, you say we have freedoms, but for how long? Will it last? Can it last? Does that worry some people on the Security Council?
No, I don't think people are worried about us on the Security Council. But the way the world is now, Jeff, no one should take peace for granted. No one. There's a lot of work we need to do here. I think everyone, I mean, you saw some very major countries, which I don't need to mention, get in a lot of trouble after their election, right? So there's no one immune. There's no one to whom disaster cannot strike. You've just got to be aware that countries break, and they break for those factors that I spoke about, and you've got to handle them. And I think Kenya has really tried and is doing a great job, but we can't take it for granted.
You know, when you look around the continent, and you know, the Security Council is not just about Africa, but when you look around the continent, is there hope when you see one country after another literally disintegrating? Do you feel hopeful, or do you say, or are your other members of the Security Council saying, you know what, that's another African basket case?
Yeah. Well, the truth, Jeff, is I swing from tremendous sadness and disappointment to feelings of optimism. I'll tell you why I'm optimistic. You know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can see trends. I can see our size. I can see our population. I can see the changes that are happening here in Kenya. And what's happening is that there's a giant in Africa, but it's a giant that is so rich and so many people have interests in it, both internally and externally. A lot of people globally don't want this giant to wake up, but it will wake up. And I'll tell you why. Our experience we're having now in the Security Council, a few decades ago, many African countries in the Security Council were not able to assert themselves because certain countries were much more powerful. In relation to where we are today, that is less so. The problems we're having, which are considerable, here in the Horn, in the Sahel, elsewhere, considerable. But increasingly, African institutions are responding. Not all the time as much as we should, but increasingly responding in an assertive way. Did you see what ECOWAS and the AU did with Mali? They just threw them out of the AU and said, no, until, if you're doing a coup d'etat, you cannot be part of the African Union. It was swift and decisive. When that continues to happen, Jeff, the Security Council, which does 70% of its work in Africa, will have less and less to do. And Africans will be more and more independent in how they shape their future. I'm optimistic about that.
When you see situations like what's happened in South Africa the last couple of weeks, does that sadden you as well?
Yes, of course, but in South Africa, remember, being on the Security Council is about threats to international peace and security. Stuff happens in countries, you know, demonstrations, riots. But a lot of that stuff, as sad as it makes me, does not rise to the level of attracting the attention of the Security Council.
You were talking about A3+1 meeting going on right now as you speak here?
Right now.
Tell us about it.
Okay, well, we've got His Excellency the President and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said, why don't you come down with your colleagues? The A3+1 is the 3 African countries on the Security Council, which include Niger and Tunisia. The +1 is very unique. It's a Caribbean country called St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It's the smallest country that's ever been on the Security Council. It has a population of 30,000. But it's run by a prime minister who's a Pan-Africanist. And he said, when we join the Security Council, we are going to stand with Africa because we're the 6th region. You know, the African Union has 5 regions. The 6th one is the diaspora. And a large percentage of the people in St. Vincent are of African descent. So that's why it's called the +1. And so we're here to strategize on how we're going to use the next 6 months, the agendas we're going to drive, to meet with President Kenyatta and hear from him, his vision for where we should be going. And we're here because we're also the coordinators of this group for the next couple of months.
And Kenya gets to chair the United Nations Security Council down the line in a couple of months, right?
In October.
Actually get to chair.
In October. In October, Kenya, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Kenyan government, will guide the affairs of the Security Council, will make the judgment calls that guide the international community in responding to threats to peace.
So you will be chair, basically. I mean, you will be the chair.
That's right. It'll be a big deal, a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations, and we will be wanting to use that month to change the debate in a few issues.
And you will get to debate everything from whether it's Afghanistan, it's Syria, it's Iraq, whatever it is, they will be looking to you as chair for guidance.
That's right. That's right.
And how long do you get that for?
One month.
Okay.
1 month, and it's a month in which you have meetings pretty much every day other than the weekends. And when you're president of the Security Council, what is really happening is that you're on a spotlight. And the judgment calls your country makes, it's not about me personally, even though I'll be sitting there most of the time. It's how good is your diplomacy? All these diplomats we have all over the world are going to be playing a role in giving me a sense of this is where things are. And as a president, you're there to guide, to listen, to make a few decisions, and to create events that drive the debate in a certain direction. And you need to carry the rest of the council with you. So it's not just about what Kenya wants, but to listen better. Our team in New York, our constant issue is listening better. You know, listening, Jeff, is hard.
Very hard.
Very hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 People talk all over the place. You hear lots of noise.
That's right.
But very few listen.
That's right.
So how important is it for you, for us as Kenya, to be on the UN Security Council? How important is it? Or is it just, you know, what, for lack of a better word, what some critics call, we're just flower girls over there?
Yeah. No, we're not flower girls. It's very important. Look at what's happening in our region. Right now, Somalia, South Sudan are all files on the Security Council. And what does that mean? It means that the efforts we've been making to work with South Sudan, to work with Somalia, we are able to do more. We're able to look at the South Sudan sanctions and say, are they realistic? Are they achievable? Are these guys being set up to fail, or are they being set up to succeed? Because we want them to succeed. And why do we want them to succeed? We're not just being good neighbors, which we are. It's because the jobs Kenyans need, the opportunity, the wealth Kenyans need will come from trading with a peaceful South Sudan. So the more effective we are on the Security Council for these 2 years, the better our economy will be, the more stable our neighborhood will be. It means that external forces that want to come into our region to divide us will have a tougher time, because we'll be there in the room. So it's something that is impactful for Kenya. And I like to think that ultimately it's all about Wanjiko. It's all about her ability to live in a peaceful country. Yeah.
As the man in that room, when you look at the other members, especially the 5 permanent members, do they respect you? I guess that's at the end of the day. Do they respect you and your country?
Well, first, Jeff, I'm no longer a boy, but I was a boy who grew up in Buruburu and got educated here in Kenya, and now I'm in this chamber, right? So they respect what has produced me because I'm their equal in how we think. I come from a group of diplomats that's their equal, and they get to see this every day, right? So I think they respect us. I really do. Yeah.
What's the greatest benefit to Kenya as a country being on the Security Council as a non-permanent member? What's the greatest benefit?
One is building more regional peace, number one. 2 is making the world, the global infrastructure for building peace and security to be more reflective of our worldview. You know, Africans, we need to be at the center of the world, not always looking in. And finally, when you're on the Security Council, people take your phone call. When you call, people take that call. And who we call and what we're calling for is up to us. But for the next 18 months, there are very few phone numbers anywhere that Kenyan diplomacy will call and not have that phone picked up attentively.
We're talking, you know, from heads of state to whatever.
Yes, because we're operating on several tiers. At the top is His Excellency, the President. He's also in the Security Council, right? So in October, I'm hoping that he will come and chair one of the meetings. So he's calling his colleagues, his counterparts. Ambassador Omamo, our CS, is calling her counterparts. So everyone's doing their thing on their level, right? And at all points, when they call, the person says, yes, it's Kenya. I respect Kenya. We're doing stuff with Kenya. But maybe they're calling because of the Security Council. It may be something I really need to hear what they're about to say.
Wow. That's an important position for 24 months.
Yeah.
And then you go back to factory settings. I mean, after that...
After that, we take a breather after extremely busy period, and then we consolidate. We take our gains, turn them into actual initiatives. We take what we've learned and start the work of revitalizing how we operate in our region and in the world. Because there are things we are understanding today, just from these last 6 months, that are making a tangible difference in how our government operates and sees the region.
I was actually going to ask you that, Balozi. You've been there 6, 7 months now, so you got, what, a year and a half to go. What have you seen? What changes have you seen? You know, anything that you say, you know what? It's a good thing we're in here in the inside looking out. Have you seen changes in these 6 months?
Yes. Yes, I have. Yes, I have. I've seen changes in how the Security Council works with our neighbors. I've seen changes in how the Security Council responds to the African voice positively. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You want more examples?
Yes, please. It's only been 6 months, but I'm sure you...
Well, look, like we have, across our continent, we're having increasing complications from the weather. You'll have noticed everyone in Nairobi is freezing. Yeah. They're saying it's not been this cold for years. That's right? If you look at the western part of the United States, they're like, it's never been this hot. Right? So a lot of the issues driving our continent are not just about quarrels over power. They're about things like climate change. They're about COVID. And we are making a big push with our other African colleagues and others to make these agendas part of how the United Nations responds. We want the United Nations and its expertise to help our people more. And we've made them more attentive and more engaged in this. On COVID, we're making the argument, and I think we've done a pretty good job in making the argument that if the vaccine is not globally available, then countries are going to have problems with peace and security. And Jeff, you didn't ask me this, but one of the great ironies that I learned, one of the most incredible things I learned in New York, is that African countries had gone, bought the vaccine and paid for it. But they were put in the back of the line when it came time to get your batch, right? Yeah. And so today, you see a lot of African countries, we talk about donations. But in fact, our government and other governments have paid, right? So there's a system there there's a hierarchical, discriminatory system we're dealing with. And one of the things that I have done with our mission is to shine the spotlight on that and to say, we see you and we won't stand for it. And phrases like vaccine appetite, vaccine nationalism, they started from the Kenyan diplomacy to describe a very real injustice. So in the 6 months I've been there, and of course our mission has been there for a long time, I think we've shed light and we've gotten the international community to start understanding that we have to have more fairness in the world. We cannot have Africans on the back of the line and others at the front of the line.
You know, that's just downright selfishness. We pay for the vaccine and we're put at the back of the line.
Correct.
I mean, how does that work? What's their explanation?
Jeff, their explanation, it barely matters what they explain, because what they're really describing in their explanation is a world that is structured a certain way. And you can see the Security Council. You say there's some who are permanent, who stay there for decades. Others come for 2 years. And yet we say countries are equal. The way the world is structured today is structured for Africa to be in a certain place. Africa is supposed to be the producer of raw materials, right? Yeah. And the recipient of aid. The way the world is structured does not really think of an Africa that is rich and strong. And that's why that word Pan-Africanism, what we're trying to do, why we run for this seat, why we have to be bold in this seat, is because that does not work for us anymore. it doesn't work for Kenya. Kenya cannot continue. We cannot prosper as we wish if the world is structured that way. And so our job in the Security Council, across our foreign policy, is to join hands with others and tell these guys, which I tell them all the time, don't take our rising or our getting wealthier or more peaceful as a threat to you. It isn't. It's your making. You will benefit. Africa rising means everyone in the world benefits. Us getting rich means everyone in the world gets richer. But they need to get to that level of understanding. Yeah. And in the meantime, we have to be very bold to assert who we are.
Wow, Balozi, must be tough dealing with all those stereotypes out there. I want to take a break, come back and talk more about that. And also, why are you wearing 2 watches? Because just me,
yeah, this is my little pet peeve. I gather a lot of data. I'm a data hound.
Okay.
So right now, I'm gathering a lot of data that I'll go and look. How many steps did I walk? How many calories did I burn?
Is that right?
That's right. What time is it in New York? Yeah. What time is it in Nairobi?
I get it. By the way, Ambassador David Gashero says a big hello.
Well, hello.
All the way from Washington, D.C.
Hello, David.
Yeah. And Ambassador Macharia Kamau, he says, you have a big brain tonight.
Well, I don't know. Thank you, Macharia.
We're talking to Ambassador Martin Kimani. He's our man in New York, Kenya's permanent representative to the United Nations, and also Kenya on the United Nations Security Council as the non-permanent member for the next 18 months or so. So we're talking about diplomacy at its finest. Keep tweeting at Koinange Jeff, at Citizen TV Kenya, the hashtag JKLive. JKLive takes a break. We'll be back in a moment.